Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming today to our presentation of the FAL calendars, Who Asked to Do What and When. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Laura Bouchard. I'm the Senior Manager for the BC and Alberta region for capacity development. I have over 15 years of senior management experience, primarily with First Nations, and I also have experience with not-for-profits and municipalities. I have with me today my amazing team for the BC and Alberta region, Laurie Mercer, Monica Bailey, and Joe Bevan. They'll each share with you a little bit about themselves as part of their presentation. Our presentation today is on the 4 FAL calendars, the Director of Finance or the Senior Finance Officer, the CAO or Band Manager or Senior Manager, the Finance and Audit Committee, and the Chief and Counsel calendar. Our presentation will be approximately 30 minutes with 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. The chat function has been disabled, so please use the Q&A function for any questions you may have. I just wanted to acknowledge before we got started that we appreciate and understand that it's been a very challenging time for most of us recently due to COVID-19. And that we also understand that this may have had an impact on your ability to meet some of the deadlines identified in the calendars. So if you're having challenges, please contact us so we can help you find ways to work through them and help you get back on track. So we're going to get started with the Director of Finance FAL calendar. All your calendars support your financial administration law. The calendars, all of the calendars are set up with the seasons across the top. Spring, more normally known as audit season for finance folks, summer, fall, and winter. And down the left-hand side, we have the various titles of governance, planning, reporting, audit, etc. So I'm going to get started with governance. So the Director of Finance is required to attend all Finance and Audit Committee meetings, and those, of course, are to happen quarterly. The Director of Finance, though, is not a member of the Finance and Audit Committee, and they can't vote. They prepare all the information and they present it at the Finance and Audit Committee. When we look at planning, the Director of Finance is responsible for preparing the budget. So they prepare the draft annual budget, they prepare the multi-year financial plan, they prepare the annual capital plan, and they prepare the budget for maintenance schedule for tangible capital assets. All those have to be approved by council by March 31st. So it's a good idea to actually maybe even start before the winter season and maybe the fall. The finance manager can delegate some of the responsibilities, but ultimately they are responsible for getting that budget to the Finance and Audit Committee for review and recommendation and to council by March 31st. The Director of Finance is also responsible for preparing the monthly financial reports, and those have to be done on a monthly basis, so through all the seasons. The new standards allow for those reports to be presented either to council, FAL, or the CAO, or a combination of both. So it is up to your First Nation to decide who gets to review those monthly financial statements. Lots of times it can be the CAO, just to take maybe some of the burden off Chief and Counsel. The Director of Finance is also responsible for preparing the quarterly financial statements and to submit those to the Finance and Audit Committee. They should be reviewed within 45 days of the quarter end. And again, they're to be presented in all 4 seasons. The Director of Finance also prepares the annual financial statements and submits them to the Finance and Audit Committee. That's usually done during audit time from April to June or spring, or audit season as we like to call it. They prepare the annual special purpose reports as well, like the council schedule of remuneration expenses that is usually part of the audit. The Director of Finance also ensures that there's an independent review and approval of monthly bank reconciliation. So this happens every month, 30 days after the end of the month. And by having an independent review, it means that the clerk that is preparing the bank reconciliation cannot review that bank reconciliation. It would perhaps be the director of finance. And if the director of finance does the bank reconciliations, then you would have the band manager, the CAO, do those reviews. If during that review, or even as part of the bank reconciliation, the director of finance notices that there are any irregularities on any identified reconciliation items, then those should be brought forward to the Finance and Audit Committee, and those as soon as practicable to do that. So they can look at ways to identify and understand what is the source of those irregularities. The Director of Finance would also be responsible for monitoring your investments, ensure that if there's any discrepancies between the investments and the strategic plan for the investments, that council is notified, and that should be going on a quarterly basis too, or spring, summer, fall, and winter. You want to keep an eye on those investments in case there's just any change in your expected results. The Director of Finance will also monitor compliance with any debt agreements that you have, and then report any concerns they may have to the Finance and Audit Committee, and that's on an as-needed basis. They monitor risks as well, and provide any recommendations for risk management. That is typically done in the winter season. But for example, if they become aware of a fraud risk or something, like they feel that the internal controls are weak in a certain area, they could make a recommendation to the Finance and Audit Committee at any time during the year and let them know that there needs to be a change in internal controls and that they need to be strengthened. And as part of the Director of Finance's responsibility, they want to ensure as well that their staff have an annual performance evaluation, so that, you know, a training plan and a performance management plan are included, so that they get feedback every year on how they were doing. In the audit, so it's the Director of Finance's responsibility to ensure that the audited financial statements are completed on time, so that council is able to approve them by the July 29th deadline. That approval, of course, usually happens in the summer season. The Director of Finance would also review the audit findings report and the management letter from the auditor. Those usually come along with the audit, and review any recommendations for any improvements or changes, and then bring those recommendations to the Finance and Audit Committee and have a discussion on those as well. Local revenue, or property taxation as is more commonly called, the Director of Finance has to ensure that you have a complete set of statements, that you track those property tax revenues and expenditures separately. So you would have a separate chart of accounts, a separate department. You want to make sure that there's the ability to report those. The Director of Finance wants to make sure that you're following your expenditure law and your property tax law, and that you're in compliance with those. And that should be on an ongoing basis. And finally, if the Director of Finance, if your First Nation has a loan with the First Nations Finance Authority, they also have to make sure that there's a complete set of the records of the revenues that are used to secure that loan. So again, you would want to be tracking and accounting for those revenues separately, so that you're able to report on them to the First Nations Finance Authority. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Monica, who will share with you a little bit about the CAO FAL calendar.
Great, thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Laura said, my name is Monica Bailey. Short background on me. I'm a CPA CA with over 10 years experience in internal controls and financial reporting. I am a former auditor. I joined FMB originally on the standards and certification team, and about 2 years ago joined the capacity development team to work closer with clients as they're going through the process of implementing their FAL. So very excited to see such a good turnout today. And I will be speaking about the Chief Administrative Officer, or CAO, calendar of FAL responsibilities. Similar to Laura, we'll have the same headings, but a few different activities for the CAO's responsibilities. In regards to governance, the CAO must review and make recommendations to Council on the administrative policies. However, the authority to approve those policies remains with Council. The approval of the procedures, however, that align with those policies and help with actually implementing them can be delegated to the CAO. So either the CAO or your council must approve the procedure piece of the policies and procedures. Once approved, the CAO will ensure that all staff receive training on those policies and that they're made available. So on a shared drive, somewhere on your network, you know, if they're just sitting on a shelf, they're not really value added. So that's another important piece. And your CD manager can certainly assist with policy training. So if that's something that you would like assistance with, please reach out to your CD manager. The CAO will also ensure that all employees sign their code of conduct declarations. Now that's not just when they're hired, but also every year thereafter. So we have it in winter. We thought it made sense to do it with your performance evaluations, but so long as that's once a year, you can decide what works best for you on timing. The CAO must also attend all Finance and Audit Committee meetings, which are at least quarterly. Similar to the Director of Finance, however, the CAO cannot be a voting member. They do not meet the independence criteria. But of course, they provide a lot of information, so they need to attend those Finance and Audit Committee meetings. So moving on to planning, a lot of these activities are going to be in the winter season as you're getting ready for the next year, but a few should be done earlier, either summer or fall. And the main ones relate to your capital assets. So that is updating your capital asset register and developing or updating your life cycle management plan. A life cycle management plan is essentially a listing of all your assets with short and long-term projections of when they will need maintenance, repairs, and or replacement. So these two items can be time intensive to update. You may need asset inspections from third parties, might need to issue an RFP and then review proposals, look at different quotes. So that's why these need to be done well before you get to your actual budgeting season. In addition, you want to update your strategic plan on an annual basis, and that should also be completed before your budget so that council can identify the strategic priorities to then flow into your department work plans and your department budgets. So that's another critical piece to have done before the end of December. The CAO is responsible to oversee both the annual budgeting process and the multi-year or 5-year financial plan. And as Laura mentioned, those need to be approved by council by March 31 so that you have them as tools for next year. And of course, we know COVID timing might change this year, but you want them as soon as you can so that you can have those budgets to work with. The CAO also is responsible to update or establish an emergency response plan, oversee the annual planning process, and the updating of the risk management plan. Now, I think for all of us, risk management is probably top of mind with COVID. Of course, no one foresaw this coming around the world, but a lot of risk can be mitigated and managed. So that's essentially what your risk management plan is. It's sitting down with council and management team and identifying the key risks, prioritizing and identifying how to mitigate or manage them. In addition, the CAO will update the organizational chart as needed, and that must then be approved by council. Moving on to reporting, the CEO will prepare and maintain the financial reports list. However, this could be delegated to the Director of Finance. The CAO must oversee the delivery of financial statements that includes monthly, quarterly, and annual. The FAL allows flexibility for who monthly financials are provided to. So the CAO, Finance and Audit Committee, and or Council may receive those. If it's the CAO, then that's number 18 there, that they're responsible to do a formal review of those monthly statements. The CAO supports the publication of the annual report to members. Now, this is a really important piece of the FAL. It supports one of the main themes of transparency with your membership and keeping them informed. So we want that to be published on a timely basis after year end. The deadline per the FAL is 180 days to allow you 2 full months after the deadline of your audited financial statements. So that works out to that September 27th date in the notes there. The CAO will also oversee the performance evaluations that need to be done at least annually and as per your nation's policies and procedures. In regards to the audit, the CAO will support the overall completion of the audit, and we're all familiar with that July 29th deadline. And in regards to information management, the CAO will implement record keeping and information privacy practices. So with that, I will pass things over to my colleague, Mr. Joe Bevan.
Hey, and just before Joe gets started, thank you so much, Monica. I just want to remind everybody about the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, please click on that and put down some questions for us so that we can answer at the end of the presentation. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Excellent. Thank you, Monica. Like I said, my name is Joe Bevan. Just a bit about myself. I am Tsimshian Nishka from the northwest coast of BC, former chief of Kitsillas First Nation. My education and experience is in accounting and finance. So I've been drew the short straw on reviewing the Finance and Audit Committee calendar. And what is the Finance and Audit Committee? The Finance and Audit Committee is a committee of council set up to do the reviews of financial information and make recommendations to council. Before anything gets started, like I always say, we have to do our governance. What is our governance? Well, signing off on code of conduct declarations. That has to be done upon appointment and annually thereafter. And then we have our finance and audit eligibility declaration. There again, that is upon appointment and annually thereafter. Just a bit about that one. We want to maintain two very important items out of this declaration is financial competency, and that is that we understand financial information, and then also the financial, the financial framework in which we operate. We also have to remain independent from the nation. So what does that mean? That we don't have a role in the financial management of the financial of our organization. So that has to be signed off upon appointment and annual thereafter. And private interest declaration also needs to be signed off. What is that? That is also our conflicts of interest. Of course, we want to avoid all conflicts when sitting on the committee such as this. Next section is planning. Of course, most of these plans are annual, like my colleagues have said before this. We have our annual budget that rolls into a multi-year financial plan, as well as our life cycle management plan rolls into that. Just a bit about the life cycle management plan. What is in that? Well, that's purchase and acquisitions of assets, disposal of assets, also the repairs and maintenance of assets. that is all of what we want to do for the year. And that all rolls into a multi-year financial plan, as well as capital projects. We want to have these all rolled into one big, nice plan. We call it a multi-year financial plan, which is based over 5 years. All of this needs to be reviewed and approved, usually by mid-March, because you want to get it to Chief and Council so they can review it and have it approved by March 31. We also want to, financial risks, we also want to monitor our financial risks. Those are ongoing throughout the year, such things as investments or any type of cash flow cash flow issues or anything like that. We just want to make sure that we have enough cash going into the year and following thereafter. Coming up to, yeah, I think that was it on this screen. Thank you. Financial reporting. Of course, all of this accumulates to financial performance. We want to see how we are doing. So like we said before, the monthly financial information can be dispersed amongst the group, council, FAC, our CAO, and into the organization. We also want to review and recommend our quarterly financials, usually about 30 days, so that we give Chief and Council a bit of time so that they can review it. And that's done every quarter, spring, summer, fall, and winter. Now, this one kind of relates to the special purpose report and the annual financial statements. That is kind of in relation to our annual audit. We want to have those reviewed and approved. Some items that go into the special purpose report are loan guarantees, what else? Loans to members, as well as leaseholds and remuneration to council. All of this needs to be reviewed and approved and to council before July 29. Great, next section is audit. Of course, that's a third-party review of our financial information and it then gets compiled. Before the audit starts, if we have an audit in the spring, we want to make sure that the auditor is selected prior to that, so sometime at the end of March. We also want to review the auditor's engagement letter and the audit plan to ensure that council knows when and what type of information is going to be reviewed. So that needs to be done prior to the start. Of course, when this is all over, it all accumulates in, we come up with an audit findings report or the management letter from the auditor. Of course, the Finance and Audit Committee want to review that to ensure that we know how our controls are doing, and also how did we do overall financially. If you are a taxing First Nation collecting property taxes, of course we want to have an annual budget drafted and have that reviewed and in council's hands before the end of the second quarter or the end of summer. If you're making over 400, if you're pulling in over 400,000 in property taxation, of course, a separate audit has to be completed for those local revenues. And that needs to be reviewed and approved and in council's hands before the end of September. So that is it for me. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lori Mercer.
Thanks, Joe, for that awesome presentation. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lori Mercer, and I'm a member of the Nisga'a Nation. I'm from the village of New Ianch, in the beautiful Nass Valley. My background experience includes a Bachelor of Commerce from UNBC and 22 years experience in financial management. I'd like to talk to you today about council's role in the FAL calendar. As we know, the FAL makes council responsible for the financial administration of the organization, whether any part of it has been delegated or assigned. One of the first things council has to do once they sign a financial administration law is to ensure that the policies and procedures are in place to support that law. Now, FMB has sample policy templates available online for our clients, free to use and amend as necessary. And that's the finance policy, the governance, the human resource, and the information management. Once these policies are approved by council, they are required to review them at least once a year to assess them to see if they need any changes. The next two items, the Code of Conduct Declaration and the Private Interest Declaration, which are to be signed by Chief and Council as soon after an election and annually thereafter. The Code of Conduct Declaration acts as the guideline for ethical decision-making for Council, and the Private Interest Declaration, which we call the Conflict of Interest Declaration, is Council's opportunity to disclose any relevant information respecting their private interests that could result in a conflict of interest. That has to be signed at least once per year. The next important item for Council to do is to establish the Finance and Audit Committee. And they do this by approving the terms of reference for the committee, appointing the chair and the vice chair. The terms of reference sets out who can be a member of that committee, but also sets out the roles and responsibilities of the Finance and Audit Committee. As we heard my colleagues mention, a lot of planning documents are being prepared for Council to review. Council's role in this is to approve them. Another important document for Council to approve is the annual budget. Now, this is normally done, according to the FAL, by March 31st. This date may change for First Nations this year due to the implications that COVID-19 has put on the ability to meet and manage. However, Council is still required to approve the annual budget as soon as they can. If there are any significant changes to the annual budget, Council is required to make that approval as well, and they do that immediately. The next two items, the multi-year financial plan and the strategic plan, go hand in hand. Council's role in this is to set out the strategic objectives for the First Nation. Once Council sets the objectives, administration puts those objectives into a multi-year financial plan, and that span is for 5 years. That plan needs to be approved by March 31st. The strategic plan is required to be updated and reviewed. The other planning documents, such as the risk management plan, the life cycle plan, the capital project plan, the emergency response plan, are all required to be approved by Chief and Council. Council is required to ensure that the Tangible Capital Asset Reserve Fund is established and maintained. What this fund does is it helps fund upcoming capital projects. And then Council is required to approve the organizational chart. So the organizational chart sets out the reporting relationships between Chief and Council, committees, and the administration. And anytime there are any changes in the organization, this chart has to be updated and approved by Chief and Council. As we know, Chief and Council have a responsibility to report back to its members and be open and transparent about the expenditures of the First Nation. And they do this by reviewing financial reports. Council is required to approve quarterly financial reports, and they do this within 45 days of quarter end. They're also required to approve the annual special purpose report, which we've heard our other colleagues mention, and that is usually included in your annual audit by July 29th. The annual report is required to be approved at least 180 days after fiscal year end. Now, there was a change in the 2019 standards, whereas the audit is to be included in the annual report by reference only. So just letting the membership know where they can find the audited financial statements. And ensuring that the annual report is published for the membership. This is Council's opportunity to report back on how well they did with carrying out the strategic objectives. And the last thing on this page is the evaluation of your CAO or your band manager. And this has to be done, it should be done at least once per year according to the contract. With regards to the audit, Council is required to approve the audited financial statements And according to the financial administration law, this has to be done by July 29th and signed by individuals identified in that law. Once the audited financial statements are approved, council is required to ensure that citizens have access to these statements, either online or available in your office, however you choose. Another responsibility of council is to sit down with the auditor and review the findings of the audit. Usually the auditor will come up with recommendations or things that they may have uncovered during the audit. And this is a time for council to review those and ensure that they get addressed in the next fiscal year. Also, it's a good time to think about what to include in the next year's audit, whether chief and council wants different reports or whether they want to carry on with the same engagement letter. And last but not least, if you're a First Nation that is charging property taxes, council is required to ensure that there's a separate bank account set up for that, for the collection of those property taxes. And that has to be done as soon as possible. The other items on here is council is required to ensure that the annual budget is approved for the local revenue property taxes. And if the First Nation is collecting over 400,000 in property taxes, then a separate audited financial statement is included in your audit, and that has to be done by July 29th. So thank you for your attention today. I know that might have been a lot of information, and I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you both to Joe and Monica. Awesome job. Thank you as well, everybody, for coming today. This presentation will be available on our website. The calendars have been sent in the mail, and we can also provide you with an electronic copy. If you would like one, just let your capacity development manager know. I know some of you have asked when we might start being able to come out and visit again. Right now, we're still sort of in the planning stages of that, but we'll let you know as soon as we can when that might be an option for us. We want to make sure that everybody is safe, that you folks are safe, and that that our managers are safe as well. So, so our contact information is on the screen. Right now, we're going to go to some questions, and I'll ask my colleagues to, jump in if they want to help out with, help me out with some of these. Okay. First question here, are there any updates to the certification requirements due to COVID specifically? No, there aren't any updates to the certification requirements due to COVID specifically, but we will certainly accommodate some of the deadlines. For example, your annual budget. A lot of offices were closed during March, and the ability to get your annual budget approved by March 31st. We're certainly going to, acknowledge and appreciate that. The recommendation would be to get your budget approved as soon as possible if you haven't. Sometimes it's a good idea to just adopt the last year's annual budget until such time as you can get a new budget in place. Next question. What happens if we lay people off and the salary budget is not used up? It would depend on the funding, where that funding came from, right? So if it was funding that was required to be totally used in the fiscal year, then you might have to return it per the contribution agreement. So you have to look at your funding agreement. Lots of times there's the opportunity to carry these funds over into the next fiscal year. And I would just strongly suggest that you contact the funding agency. Due to these challenging times, I'm sure a lot of them are going to be willing to accommodate you and let you carry that funding forward. But please check with them just to make sure. Another question, is a digital signature legally acceptable for annual documents? I would again, recommend that you have your chief and counsel approve the digital signature and have like a BCR, and you would send it to whichever agency that you're signing those annual documents on behalf of, to let them know that this digital signature has the authority to represent an actual signature, and confirm with them that they will accept those electronic signatures. Just going through here. Have another question. I work in the health department. Could the multi-year financial plan be our First Nations Health Authority collective agreement and such topics of surplus review agreements issued and approved by First Nations Health Authority? So your multi-year financial plan would certainly include and consider for sure the funding that you've been provided in your health agreement. It could be an outline for you to start with, but you may have own source revenue that you might add to that budget, so you would consider that as well. But for sure, the funding that has been approved to you by the First Nation Health Authority should be part of your multi-year financial plan as well. Another question. What special reports are required under a FAL? When might these be prepared and published? Example, loans, guarantees, and remuneration. So these special purpose reports do include reports on your loans and your guarantees and chief and counsel remuneration and expenses. And normally these are prepared at the end of the year and are usually part of your annual audited statements. So one more question here I think we have time for, and it is, what can department managers do to assist with the FAL? So you should have all of your department managers provide them with a copy of the financial administration law so they can read it. It might be good to have us come in and do a session, or right now we could do a video conference to explain the financial administration law to your department managers. Might also be a good idea to have them review all the policies that you have that support your financial administration law. And again, we could also, do a video conference and go through some of those policies and help explain those to your department managers. And that would help them understand and assist you with the financial administration law if they understand that law. So that's all the questions we have for now. So thank you all so much for attending. If you have any additional questions that you think of, afterwards, as we always do, it's like, oh, I should have thought of that. Please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is on the screen there, or you can go to our website and our contact information is on the website as well. And we'd be more than willing to answer your questions and help you out. So thank you again, everybody, for coming, and have a great day.